In 1942, the United States believed its armored forces were ready for war. The M4 Sherman, fast, reliable, easy to produce, was the pride of American industry. Its 75mm gun could destroy anything Germany fielded at the time. Commanders boasted that quantity and mobility would crush any opponent, but war has a cruel way of proving confidence wrong. In July 1943, during the Battle of Kursk, the Germans unveiled two monsters, the Panther and the Tiger the Fur. Heavily armored, long-barreled, and terrifyingly accurate, they changed the battlefield overnight. Reports from the Eastern Front reached Allied ears, Soviet T-34s being torn apart at over a mile. By the time American forces landed in Normandy a year later, those same German tanks had appeared in France, and the U.S. Army was not ready. Sherman crews soon discovered the truth. Their 75mm guns couldn't penetrate a Tiger's front armor at any range. Even the newer 76mm version struggled at distances over 500 yards. American shells bounced off German steel while 88mm rounds turned Allied tanks into fireballs. The shock was immediate and devastating. In the summer of 1944, a single Tiger could stall an entire American column. At Villers-Bocage, Normandy, German ace Michael Wittmann destroyed more than a dozen British vehicles in minutes. Stories like that spread through Allied ranks like wildfire. Crews began calling their own tanks Ronsons, after the lighter that lights every time. Back in the United States, the Ordnance Department faced a crisis. It wasn't just about morale. It was about physics. The 75mm and 76mm guns had reached their limits. Their shells lacked the velocity and penetrating power to match German armor. A new weapon was needed, one that could fire farther, faster, and harder. That's when attention turned to the 90mm M3 gun, originally designed for anti-aircraft use. It had the range, the muzzle velocity, and the punch to challenge even the heaviest armor. Engineers realized that with proper mounting, it could become the tank destroyer America desperately needed. But doctrine stood in the way. The U.S. Army's Tank Destroyer Command believed mobility and ambush tactics mattered more than armor or gun size. They saw tank destroyers as fast hunters and not heavy beasts. The M10 Wolverine, armed with a 3-inch gun, reflected that philosophy. Light armor, open turret, speed over strength. Yet on the battlefields of France, that doctrine was dying fast. By mid-1944, reports from the front grew desperate. Tank destroyer crews were being outgunned. Even when they ambushed, they often couldn't penetrate German armor before being destroyed themselves. Something had to change, and fast. In August 1944, the first M36 Jackson prototypes rolled out. It was an M10 hull fitted with a new turret designed to carry the 90mm gun. It wasn't perfect, still open-topped, still thinly armored, but it finally gave American crews the range and power to fight back. The race was on. Could these new guns reach the front before the next major German offensive? Because deep inside the forests of Western Europe, the Wehrmacht was preparing something colossal, an operation that would throw everything it had left against the Allies. And when it came, those 90mm guns would face their ultimate test. By September 1944, American supply ships began unloading strange new vehicles at ports in France, tank destroyers with long, slender guns that dwarfed the Shermans beside them. They were the M36 Jacksons, armed with the new 90mm M3 cannon. Fresh paint still gleamed on their turrets, their crews barely trained in their operation. The ordnance units wasted no time. Old M10s were pulled into workshops and fitted with the new turrets. Every available hull was converted. Every factory back home pushed to produce more. There was no fanfare, no parades or speeches, just silent urgency. The front needed them yesterday. By early October, the first M36s joined the fight in Lorraine, supporting Patton's Third Army. Crews were cautious, unsure how their new weapon would perform. But the results came fast and loud. At Ericourt, U.S. tank destroyers ambushed a column of Panthers at over 1,000 yards. For the first time, American gunners watched a German tank burn before it could even return fire. Word spread through the ranks like wildfire. "The 90's a beast," one crewman wrote home. It could punch through 6 inches of armor at long range, something unthinkable just months before. German radio intercepts began noting reports of new long-gun destroyers. The Wehrmacht, always proud of its Tigers, took interest, but not fear. they still believed their armor was supreme. German propaganda mocked the M36 as a desperate improvisation. Frontline gunners laughed, claiming no open-topped vehicle could survive a Tiger's 88mm, and to some extent, they were right. The M36's thin armor and exposed turret were vulnerabilities, but what they didn't understand was range. In this duel, distance would become America's shield. As autumn turned to winter, Allied command prepared for a final push into Germany. Patton's divisions were advancing across France. Eisenhower believed the war could end by Christmas, but beneath that optimism, small warning signs flickered. Recon units reported unusual German troop movements in the Ardennes, trucks without headlights, tanks covered with branches, and civilians ordered to evacuate remote villages. Few believed it mattered. The German army was supposedly broken, retreating out of fuel. Even Patton dismissed the idea of a counterattack, calling it impossible. But on the other side of the forest, in candlelit bunkers, the last great gamble of the Third Reich was forming. Operation Wacht am Rhine, the Battle of the Bulge. Over 200,000 German soldiers, 600 tanks, and a plan so bold it bordered on madness. Hitler wanted to split the Allied line, recapture Antwerp, and force a peace on his own terms. And at the tip of that spear were the Tigers and Panthers, elite heavy tanks led by veterans of the Eastern Front. They would strike through the dense Ardennes, where Allied armor could barely maneuver. In Hitler's mind, it was the perfect trap. The Americans would crumble under shock in winter, but fate had placed a few hundred M36s right in their path. Crews who had barely fired a dozen live shells would soon face the most feared tanks in the world, in blizzards, at night with freezing fuel lines and frozen hands. In the quiet before the offensive, soldiers huddled in makeshift camps. Engines ticked softly as ice formed on barrels. Some joked about home. Others cleaned their guns again and again as if sensing what was coming. When the first shells fell on the morning of December 16, 1944, the world erupted in flame. And the M36 Jackson, the weapon America had built in desperation, was about to earn its name. The American Tank Destroyer Command was born out of fear of German blitzkrieg. In 1940, as France fell in 6 weeks, the U.S. watched helplessly as German panzers encircled and annihilated armies. When America entered the war, its generals vowed to never let that happen to them. So instead of matching tank for tank, they designed a new idea, the Hunter doctrine. Tank destroyers were not to duel tanks head-on. They were to move fast, strike from ambush, and disappear. Mobility and speed were their armor. The M10 Wolverine and later the M18 Hellcat embodied that idea, light, agile, and deadly in surprise attacks. But by 1944, that doctrine was breaking down. The front was no longer fluid. It was a maze of hedgerows, towns, and fortified lines. The ambushes that worked in open terrain often turned suicidal in Europe's tight geography. When Tigers appeared, their range and armor made them nearly immune to the old U.S. weapons. The M36 Jackson changed that equation. Its 90mm gun allowed American tank destroyers to fulfill their doctrine again, striking from afar, beyond the range of German retaliation. Suddenly, mobility as armor made sense again because distance became the shield. Crews could set up in hidden positions, fire at 2,000 yards, and withdraw before the enemy even located them. Tactically, it was a rebirth. The hunter could finally hunt the lion. The 90mm M3 cannon was a masterpiece of wartime adaptation. Originally designed for the M1 anti-aircraft gun, it was re-engineered to fit armored vehicles. It fired a 24-pound shell at nearly 2,700 feet per second, more than twice the kinetic energy of the Sherman's 75mm. At 1,000 yards, its armor-piercing rounds could punch through 6 inches of steel, but numbers don't capture its impact. Soldiers' reactions do. For the first time, American gunners could see their rounds shatter the myth of German invincibility. They didn't have to flank or close in. They could engage at range and still win. The M3 gun used several types of ammunition, APC, HVAP, and HE. The HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing round, was the real game-changer. A tungsten cord projectile capable of cutting through even a Tiger's frontal armor at long range. Though rare and expensive, a few crates of HVAP could mean the difference between death and victory. Engineers also improved the recoil system and breech design, allowing faster reloads and greater stability. When the M36 fired, its massive blast could be felt half a mile away, a deafening report that echoed through the valleys of Belgium. Crews described it as like firing thunder. The Germans respected that sound, even if they didn't admit it publicly. In late 1944, captured German reports reveal a telling arrogance. Luftwaffe reconnaissance had spotted the new American vehicles, but analysts dismissed them. Lightly armored, open-topped, no threat to heavy panzers, one report concluded. German gunners seasoned on the Eastern Front believed no American gun could challenge their Tigers. It was a fatal underestimation. Behind every weapon lies a man, cold, scared, and stubbornly alive. The M36 may have looked powerful, but to its crews, it was far from invincible. Its open turret meant snow, rain, and shrapnel poured in freely. When shells burst nearby, the air filled with burning metal, slicing through the crew compartment. They wore thick gloves not just for the cold, but to keep skin from freezing to the steel breech. Every shot was personal. The gunner's heartbeat aligned with the clank of the breech. The loader's muscles screamed as he rammed in another 90mm shell, 24 pounds of brass and lead. The commander, standing exposed above the turret, searched through binoculars for the glint of German armor. They knew that if the enemy saw them first, they wouldn't survive long. Yet, despite the fear, these men stayed. Tank destroyer crews were volunteers, men who wanted to hunt tanks. They took pride in precision, in being calm under chaos. One crewman of the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion later recalled, "We knew what those Tigers could do, but when that 90 went off, it felt like justice. They fought not for glory, but survival, a daily contest between fear and discipline, and every time a Tiger exploded in the distance, the men inside the Jacksons felt a surge of vindication. The weapon worked. They had finally caught up. At higher levels, the M36's story was one of changing minds. Before its arrival, U.S. command had resisted heavier tank destroyers. Generals like Leslie McNair, architect of the Tank Destroyer Command, believed American tanks didn't need to match German armor. They just needed better tactics. But battlefield reports told a different story. Tactics alone couldn't stop an 80mm shell. By late 1944, leadership began to shift. General Patton, who once dismissed tank destroyers as a waste of steel, personally requested M36 units for his Third Army. General Omar Bradley urged ordnance to prioritize 90mm production. Even Eisenhower, usually cautious about doctrinal debates, approved large-scale conversions of M10s into M36. These weren't just logistical decisions, they were admissions. Admissions that America had underestimated the German tank arm, and that industrial might alone couldn't overcome battlefield physics. The M36 represented humility, the ability to adapt when old ideas failed. When the Battle of the Bulge erupted, these decisions proved prophetic. Had the M36 not reached Europe in time, many Allied positions might have been overrun entirely. As one report from Patton's staff noted, the 90 saved more than tanks. It saved time. And time is what won us the Bulge. Leadership had learned its lesson. War rewards adaptation, not arrogance. For 2 years, the Tiger I had been more than a tank. It was a myth. Its silhouette struck fear long before it appeared. Soldiers spoke of it in whispers as if it were a beast rather than a machine. Even the sound of its Maybach engine sent chills through infantry trenches. The 90mm gun changed that mythology. When M36s began knocking out Tigers at long range, rumors reversed direction. Now German crews spoke of an American gun that could kill from beyond sight. For the first time, Tiger commanders hesitated before advancing. Panther units began maneuvering more cautiously, using forests and villages for cover instead of open fields. The psychological tables had turned. To American troops, this shift was electrifying. They'd spent years fighting uphill against German superiority. Better optics, better guns, better armor. Now, finally, the Germans were afraid. Not of numbers, but of a single, precise American weapon. Confidence spread through Allied lines. Infantry platoons cheered when they saw the long barrel of an M36 rolling up behind them. Tankers who once avoided confrontation now sought it. The battlefield tone had changed, not through speeches or propaganda, but through cold, mathematical power. A gun that could kill at 2,000 yards had ended 2 years of humiliation. The men believed again. Their leaders trusted the new machine, and deep in the forests of Belgium, that belief would soon be tested in the harshest way imaginable. Under snow, under fire, and under the shadow of Germany's last great gamble. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes. Before dawn, the forest erupted. Thunder rolled across the snow as over 2,500 German guns opened fire. Shells rained down on American lines, command posts vanished, roads shattered, men ran through blizzards of steel and fire. When the barrage stopped, the tanks came. Columns of Panthers and Tiger IIs, the dreaded Königstiger, advanced through the white wilderness. Their 80mm guns glowed faintly red from the cold. The offensive, Operation Wacht am Rhein, had begun. The last great gamble of the Third Reich, caught in the chaos, were the scattered units of the 703rd and 814th Tank Destroyer Battalions, among the few equipped with the new M36s. They were outnumbered, undersupplied, and often surrounded. But they had one advantage, a gun that could reach farther than the Tigers could dream. On the morning of December 19th near Bastogne, one M36 platoon under Lieutenant Robert Nash took position along a ridgeline overlooking a frozen valley. Visibility was poor, fog hung low, and the sound of German armor echoed through the mist. Nash ordered his gunners to hold fire until the enemy was clearly within range. Through binoculars he saw them, 3 Tigers advancing in formation, their turrets sweeping slowly from side to side. The crews inside those German beasts were confident. They had crushed American tanks before and expected the same again. But the range this time was different. They were still nearly 2,000 yards away. Nash gave the order. Fire! The first 90mm shell screamed across the valley, a flash of orange in the white haze. It struck the lead Tiger square on the glacis plate. The shell penetrated clean through, bursting the turret seam. The Tiger lurched, then stopped, smoke pouring from its hatches. The second and third Tigers halted, confused, thinking they'd hit a mine. The next shot destroyed the second tank. Now the third Tiger fired back. Its 80mm round slammed into the ridge, showering snow and dirt over the American destroyers. But the M36s didn't move. Reload, aim, fire. A third flash, and the final Tiger vanished in black flame. In less than 3 minutes, the valley fell silent again. 3 Tigers, Germany's most feared weapons, lay burning in the snow. Word of that engagement spread rapidly through the 101st Airborne lines defending Bastogne. Those new TDs just killed 3 Tigers, someone whispered in disbelief. For the first time that winter, American troops felt something new. Hope. Elsewhere along the Ardennes front, other M36 units were fighting similar battles. At St. Vith, the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion used their 90mm guns to ambush Panther tanks attempting to cut through the U.S. 7th Armored Division. Their fire was so effective that German panzer crews began calling the weapon the Long Death. Reports came in daily. One crew knocked out a Tiger II at 2,200 yards, nearly unheard of at the time. Another M36 platoon, near Rochefort, destroyed 4 Panthers in 1 hour, firing from hidden forest positions. Each engagement carved another crack into the myth of German invincibility. But the victories came at a terrible cost. The M36's open turret made it a death trap under artillery and air bursts. Snow, shrapnel, and splinters rained directly on the crews. Many gunners froze to death at their posts, refusing to abandon their vehicles. In one report, a single M36 fought until its barrel glowed red, firing 56 rounds before being destroyed. When rescuers arrived, they found the gunner still gripping the trigger, frozen in place. For every Tiger destroyed, another American vehicle was lost. But the ratio was changing, and that change mattered more than numbers. As the German offensive stalled, their tank commanders began avoiding open ground. They no longer advanced with arrogance, they moved with caution. The laughter that had once echoed in their radios, mocking the weak American guns, had gone silent. Because now, in the frozen forests of Belgium, the hunters had turned the hunt. By February 1945, the German dream of victory in the Ardennes lay buried beneath the snow. The mighty counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge, had bled the Wehrmacht dry. But the war wasn't over. Now came the final push, the crossing of the Rhine, and the drive into the heart of Germany. For the M36 crews, this was the endgame. Their machines, once doubted, were now the spearhead of American armored divisions. They had earned a grim respect, even from the tankers who once pitied them. In early March, near Remagen, the impossible happened. American forces seized the Ludendorff Bridge intact, a steel lifeline across the Rhine. German command was stunned. Hitler himself called it madness. For the Allies, it was the opening they had prayed for. As infantry rushed the bridge, German forces threw everything they had to destroy it: artillery, airstrikes, and armor. Panthers and Jagdpanthers advanced through the ruined streets of Erpel, their engines echoing against the cliffs. Waiting for them were the 656th and 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalions, their M36s positioned on high ground overlooking the valley. At dawn, through rain and mist, the German armor appeared. The lead Panther opened fire, destroying a Sherman in one shot. Before it could reload, a 90mm shell from an M36 slammed into its side armor. The gunners aimed true despite the fog. The shell pierced, exploded, and threw the turret clean off. The valley filled with echoes of steel and thunder. Over the next 4 hours, the M36s fired nearly 400 rounds, engaging targets up to 2,500 yards away. By sunset, the American line still held. 5 Panthers lay burning and the Rhine crossing remained open. The victory at Remagen broke the last natural barrier into Germany. And the weapon that made it possible wasn't the Sherman. It was the M36 Jackson, with its long 90mm barrel, cutting through German armor like a blade through glass. In the weeks that followed, as the Allies swept eastward, the German tank force began to disintegrate. Fuel shortages, broken logistics, and shattered morale left most panzer units fighting in fragments. But the few remaining Tiger IIs, King Tigers, still posed a deadly threat. They were too heavy for most bridges, too slow to retreat, but in defense, they were monsters. At Cologne, a King Tiger sat at the end of a street blocking the path of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division. Its thick front armor could shrug off almost anything. For hours, it pinned down American infantry. Then, from the shadows of a nearby building, an M36 rolled forward. The crew aimed carefully, the target's side armor just visible between the buildings. They fired once. The shell hit. Smoke poured from the Tiger's vents as the crew bailed out in panic. The 90mm gun had done what few weapons could, nor it killed the King. It wasn't the only such duel. Across the Ruhr and the Saar, M36 units kept meeting German armor head-on and winning. Their kill-to-loss ratio by spring 1945 was over 4-1. German prisoners spoke of the black-barreled destroyers with quiet respect. To them, the M36 was not a tank. It was a sniper cannon on treads. But as the war neared its end, the men inside those vehicles paid the price of victory. They fought in open turrets through snow, rain, and fire. Many lost their hearing from the constant concussion of the 90mm gun. Others suffered burns, frostbite, or shrapnel wounds that would scar them for life. Yet they never wavered, because by then every crew knew they were no longer just defending ground. They were breaking the myth of the invincible German tank. In April 1945, outside Duisburg, a final recorded duel took place. 2 King Tigers attempted to retreat across a field road. 3 M36s from the 776th Battalion opened fire from a ridge nearly a mile away. The first Tiger was hit through the side armor. The second tried to pivot, but its engine stalled. A third shot tore through its rear plate. Both burned for hours. When the smoke cleared, one M36 gunner was heard whispering to himself, "They're not gods anymore." That night, the battalion radioed in its report, 2 Tiger IIs destroyed, no losses. The laughter of the German gunners, the same laughter that had echoed months earlier when the first M36s rolled into Europe, was gone forever. By May, the war in Europe was over. But the weapon that had earned its name in blood in the M36 Jackson would live on. It served in Korea and Yugoslavia, even decades later in the Middle East. A relic of World War II that refused to die. A weapon born from desperation that became a symbol of American resolve, and the sound that ended the Tiger's reign. In the end, the Germans had built the best tanks. But America built the tank destroyer that killed them. The war ended not with cheers, but with silence. Tanks rusted in fields, guns cooled in the rain, and the men who had fought inside those steel beasts went home and changed forever. For the M36 crews there was pride and a shadow. They had seen what power looked like, what a single weapon designed in haste could do when wielded with courage. They had watched tigers burn, not out of hatred but necessity. Each kill was survival, each shot one more day to live. In the years that followed, the 90mm gun became more than a number on a blueprint. It symbolized the moment when the balance of fear shifted, when German superiority, the myth of the unbreakable tiger, finally cracked under American steel and will. But the lesson went deeper than firepower. The M36 was proof that victory isn't born in perfection, but in adaptation. It wasn't the biggest or the fastest or the most armored. It was built from what America could make, refined through loss, forged through need, and trusted by men who had nothing left but courage. Even decades later, when historians walk through the museums of Bastogne or stand beside the burned wrecks in the Ardennes, the story still lingers. A story of arrogance and invention, of laughter that turned to silence, of a war that proved no empire, no machine, is invincible forever. Because in the end, the 90mm gun didn't just kill tigers. It killed the myth of invincibility itself.